hang up.
The Wasatch Report, shooting straight on everything from prepping to politics.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Wasatch Report. I'm Suzanne Sherman. I will be your host for the next hour here on the Cerberus Radio Network, where we defend liberty and freedom from the flames of tyranny. Jeff Johnson's in our studio today, getting all the levels set, and he's going to be joining me in a really great discussion. I have some fantastic topics lined up for today, which is, by the way, March 8th, year of our Lord 2019. You can follow us on Facebook, facebook.com/Cerberus Radio Network. We have a fan page, CRN. I'd like to thank all of those that have joined, those that are following us over there. My page, also the Wasatch Report. I'm not having any activity on there because I'm still serving hard time in the Facebook Correctional Facility. Fear not, I found another means by which I can get my message out there. It might not be as convenient for everybody as Facebook, and we know that's what keeps Facebook going, is its convenience and how entrenched they are in our lives. I do have a web page now. We're gaining some followers. People are joining that one at SuzanneCSherman.com. If you go there, not only I have my first welcome blog in there, all of the articles that have been published are now under one section there called Suzanne's Articles. And then I have a social media network bar. And if you hit Facebook, it will take you to the Wasatch Report radio show page. I have a SoundCloud button there. That will take you to all of our SoundCloud shows on the Cerberus Radio Network, where if you miss our shows live, you can download any of them. I think we've got a whole bunch of them up there now. We've got over 200 on our YouTube page. I do have a YouTube button on the bar, also on the SuzanneCSherman.com webpage. So you can access all of my articles, blogs, and our Cerberus radio media. This is going to hold you over until we get that webpage lined up, but I'll make sure whichever one you go to, you can stay on top of all of our broadcasts. We really appreciate the support. I really appreciate people being evangelical in our message when I cannot defend our positions on the Zuckerberg community, because Andrew, once again, our good friend, my article published by the 10th Amendment Center on immigration, I guess, was challenged, and he did an absolutely outstanding job of speaking on our behalf. So thank you. Thank you very much, Andrew. Jeff, good morning. How are you today?
I'm doing very well, thank you. And we're all set. Everything's working. No problem that I know of.
I so appreciate what you do. Folks, just so you know, I could not do this without Jeff. And not only does he produce the show, but he does all the setup, gets everything going. He gets all the shows lined up on SoundCloud, on YouTube. So big kudos to you. Again, much appreciation. I want to start off today's discussion with I have 3 articles from the Deseret News about proposed legislation that you might think it's simply relevant to Utah, but it really affects everybody. And these are common issues that will affect us all. First, I think I will get into a stand your ground law. We know that really came to the forefront of discussion after the Trayvon Martin Zimmerman case, where a man was shot. And the discussion was where Trayvon Martin was shot by Zimmerman. And everybody was discussing whether or not we should have stand your grounds, or should standard ground laws, should you have a right to do that, or do you have a duty to retreat? So that debate has really never gone away. But here in Utah now, a bill that strengthens our current code for self-defense has passed the Senate by an 18-8 vote. The bill already passed the House and now is going to be sent to the governor for signing into law. HB 114 states an individual does not have an obligation to retreat from an aggressor, and failure to retreat is not relevant to whether or not they acted reasonably. I think this, Senator Gene Davis, a Democrat from Salt Lake City, not surprisingly, spoke in opposition to the bill, saying it would create a wild, wild west scenario. I think this bill will bring about a lot of shootings and justify shootings when they shouldn't be. this is, when we were talking about firearms yesterday, I was mentioning that a family member, when I was living in California, had told me, I really don't like the idea of open carry like we have here in Utah, because again, it was the wild, wild west scenario, that boogeyman. I don't want to be shot if I accidentally bump into somebody in Starbucks. This is the kind of scare tactic rhetoric that feeds into the gun control enthusiasts. So we really need to and you know what? I don't know if you've seen this, Jeff, but Tom Woods actually wrote a book dispelling popular myths. I'm going to find it because he has a chapter on the myth that the wild, wild west was just this, shoot 'em up place. There was just absolutely crazy, hail of gunfire and bullets all around you. I'll find that and we can discuss that. So I think this is a good law. I think there is, if you impose on somebody an obligation or duty to retreat, they're going to be subjecting themselves to personal risk. What are your thoughts on that, Jeff?
Yeah, the notion that you have to turn and run puts you at risk. I mean, you don't ever want to turn your back on the threat, and you can back away from the threat. But again, now you're blind. You're moving in a direction, in a blind direction. There's just so much that can go wrong with this. You stand your ground is a good law.
I agree. And, nobody's saying fire till slide lock, make sure they're dead, then reload and hit them again. We see all these arguments, these propositions put forth. But, I really think that, again, particularly if you're using a firearm, you shoot until the threat is eliminated. If that person's dead, they're dead. The threat's eliminated. But if you shoot them, they're wounded to the point where they're no longer a threat, then you cease firing. You keep an eye on them. You cover them until the police arrive. But I really do not like, even California, section 198.5 in the penal code says that they will give you a rebuttable a presumption that you acted within reason. For instance, if somebody breaks into your home, there's no, that goes into the castle doctrine, but you don't have a duty to retreat there. Again, some people like Senator Gene Davis in Salt Lake City would probably want everybody to run and hide. Interestingly enough, I came across a scenario when we first moved to this town out here. My boys had already gotten their black belts in Korean Taekwondo, but we found a little studio, a martial arts studio, and I was hoping that they could train and maybe help teach there. And in the introductory course that we took, what the woman was teaching was just defend yourself and never strike back. So what she was having them do, that the assailant would have the victim and in some sort of a threatening position, either a chokehold or somehow grabbing them. And then she would show them how to get out and then from that grip and then run away. And as you intimated, Jeff, that doesn't stop the threat. That renders you vulnerable because you take your eye off the assailant. You put your back to them. They can chase you. They can outrun you. They can shoot you. So I, again, wholeheartedly support this bill. We discussed vaccinations yesterday on my show. I'm not going to get into whether or not everybody should be vaccinated. I don't like the idea of mandatory vaccinations. As I said yesterday, my children were both vaccinated. Although I will say I did not do the final live polio shot. I don't know. I remember getting that when I was 12, and I did not do that one with them. But with my younger son, because he was born premature, I waited until he was 2. We never did daycare, and I just waited till his body had developed a little bit longer. That being said, I don't know what I would do today if I had newborns or not. It's amazing how many more shots are available. And, one thing I've noticed is as shots are developed, and these vaccinations come about, it seems all of a sudden it's vital that people get them. So is this a matter of economics or is this a matter of public health? I'll leave that to you. But here's a discussion again from Utah, and this was in the Deseret News. With new measles outbreaks, lawmakers must weigh personal freedom and societal good. Societal good to me is the death knell of liberty, because this is pure Agenda 21. This is pure Marxism, where they want to sacrifice personal liberty, personal property, all for the greater good. And vaccines are particularly nefarious because people can use them as a means. Well, if you don't support vaccines, clearly, then obviously you're okay with these babies getting sick and dying. I don't know if you saw this advertisement, Jeff. It was on television. I've seen it a few times. And it was for the pertussis or whooping cough vaccine. And it shows a grandmother holding a newborn infant, then using some animation, they put, instead of her loving face holding her baby, they put the head of a wolf holding this baby. So if you do not get your pertussis vaccination and you hold your newborn infant, grandchild, you are a predator. This is just, I felt that was egregious. Have you seen that advertisement, Jeff? I've seen it a few times.
I have not. I've never seen that one. It might be a local one to the west there. I don't know.
Yeah, the notion, I just found that extremely insulting. But let me get to this article real quick. Apparently, there have been some recent measles outbreaks in the U.S., and they're disappointing as they are worrisome, the article says. And now they renew an old challenge for state lawmakers. Should government be... That's where I always say no. But let's, for the purpose of this argument, let's read the article. Should the government be responsible for ensuring children get their vaccines? It's a conflict of personal freedom versus societal good. Roughly 95% of the community needs the treatment in order for vaccines to protect others. Given human nature, its proclivity for self-interest rather than altruism, the easiest way to reach herd immunity is by government mandate. Boy, just another example. I'm bovine 30-06. You know, we're tax chattel. We are cattle. We are to be herded. We are to be vaccinated. Herd mentality. The fact that people are not absolutely outraged by that term, that we are nothing but herds to be managed, is, I find, an absolute affront to personal liberty and freedom. Jeff, you had some comments about the efficacy of vaccinations and why would people worry if their kids were vaccinated. Do you want to share your sentiments that we were discussing before the show?
My whole thing is, you keep hearing from government that if that child goes to school, they're a danger. Okay, well, if every other child in that school is vaccinated against these diseases, against measles, and they work, how is one child that's not vaccinated that could get measles threatening all the 99.999% other students that are vaccinated against it? If they work, there should be no threat whatsoever. So that personal liberty of that family shouldn't matter. If they just choose not to do it, then they shouldn't do it.
And
I mean, that's the case.
We've got that herd mentality. You know, hey, you know, I want to protect my herd by having my firearms rights not infringed upon. Yeah. How's that? You damn.
That's where I was going to go with this. Is that, okay, if it's for the public good that we must take away your liberty and force you to get vaccinations, then it's for the public good that we force you to buy insurance. And you should have no say in this because it's for the public good. So you have to buy medical insurance. And not only that, you have to buy it from us, the government, and there's no other option. And so don't fight that. It's for the public good that there should be no gun violence. We should take all guns away from everyone. It's for the public good. So this is the slippery slope. If you say that, yes, vaccines for the public good, then you better accept forced health care, gun control, everything else that's for the public good.
And what the article continues here is they say some make a viable argument against allowing government to force what they claim is an individual decision. And Jeff, you made the comment that if the child goes to school, it's going to be a danger to the other children. I submit to you that the real danger to the children is the public education system in its entirety, but I digress. So every state has, over the years, allowed exemptions to parents who choose not to vaccinate their children. Some of the exemptions are medical, weak immune systems, or challenged or certain allergies, posing a higher risk to negative effects. Other exemptions are for personal reasons. And I discussed this yesterday when we had this conversation. California used to allow a personal philosophical waiver for vaccinations. They got rid of that. Utah is among 17 states to honor personal reasons for objecting to vaccinations. Utah also ranks 41st in the nation, pardon my French, for the number of 2-year-olds who are fully immunized. The trend worries medical experts who say the risks of not immunizing far outweigh any risk associating with receiving the vaccine. Commenting from the confirmation of 206 measles cases this year, Rich Lakin, an immunization program manager at the Utah Department of Health, told the Deseret News, "I think it's probably a good indicator that if you're not going to vaccinate, we're going to see the diseases come back again. They've long been proven effective. Those whose lives bridge the pre- and post-vaccine worlds might well describe the effects as miraculous. And while medical professionals confirm vaccinations carry a small risk of negative effects, like some kids die, as does any drug, they might affirm the measles vaccine is responsible for reducing the measles-related death toll in the U.S. from 500 annually to 0. Now, yesterday I shared with listeners a conversation I had with my son's pediatrician when I was pregnant with my firstborn, asking him about why do we vaccinate for chickenpox. It's a mild disorder. Very few, I think, ever die from this. But what he said the justification was that billions of dollars are lost annually to businesses because a parent has to stay home and tend to a sick child. I submit to you, there should always be a parent home to raise their child, not just tend to a sick child. But the point was the businesses, the corporations were losing their little workforce drone here. The work has been accomplished by mandates getting this protection, the herd immunity, by mandates to immunize children before they enter school. What Utah and other state legislators must grapple with is where to draw the line between individual choice and a responsibility to protect its residents. Viewing the problem through the lens of public safety is the best method. I disagree. I think we should view the problem through the lens of personal liberty and individual responsibility. Consider seatbelt laws, smoke-free zones, speed limits, and each of these intersections, the state has a compelling interest to keep the individual safe. Smoke-free zones and seatbelt laws, those, I don't smoke cigarettes and I like not smoking them, but I don't think they should be mandated by government. If you have a restaurant and you choose to allow people to smoke in there, that's your decision as a business owner. If a restaurant is going to have patrons smoking, I will go where somebody doesn't want to smoke and I will go eat there so I don't have to smell it. But I don't think the government should tell business owners what they can allow in their own private businesses. So through this scope of protecting the public safety, medical exemptions to vaccines have merit and ought to continue so as to not harm persons unable to process the immunization. Personal objections, however, they say, deserve greater scrutiny from lawmakers. Oh, isn't that cute? We are asking for a robust debate based on scientific evidence and respecting religious and cultural considerations. So again, in California, we had this exemption taken away for personal decisions and personal philosophical matters. Again, who was behind that? It was a pediatrician and the pharmaceutical industry that were behind taking this philosophical waiver out from there. Again, this is a state issue. The feds have no business in this. We discussed yesterday how the feds were mandating state employees in the health organizations, health industry to have their flu shots. We have also a case, and I didn't get to expound on this yesterday, an article here from the New American FDA boss to the state says that you have to eliminate vaccination exemptions or what? Now, or else. So again, They're unable to convince, the article says, Americans to fully trust the vaccines. We have endless marketing propaganda. I mean, you watch the news or you watch any shows on television, I don't care what channel it is, look and see how many commercials are from the related pharmaceutical industries. In fact, I discussed this, if you'll go back to my show, it was, I think, February 1 or 2 years ago with Dr. Marianne Block, and we discussed why they are not doing any medical tests before putting kids on ADHD medications. In fact, they just use subjective screening questions, and then based on those results, interpret the need to put these kids on these powerful psychotropic medications, again, with no medical testing. And I said, how come you're not on every major news media outlet telling this story? Because every time we have these mass shootings, it seems like they're perpetrated by kids that are on these medications. And she's the one that pointed out to me, don't you watch the advertisers on these shows? I've tried to do this and they tell me, we can't have you on. We'll lose our ad revenue. So this is really important. This is, you know, again, the tail wagging the dog here. That's big. There's big money to be made here. And the FDA administrative boss, Scott Gottlieb, I think he has since stepped down, but he's threatening to use federal force. He made some bizarre comments on the media, said that vaccination mandates may force the hand of the federal government. He wants to force states to vaccinate children, even if it goes against the religion or conscience of the parents. And he said that his critics said that his comments and the sentiments were authoritarian and unacceptable. Again, if you want to read more, that article is in thenewamerican.com. Jeff, maybe you can post it a little later. I'll put it on my Twitter account. You can find me on Twitter at Cowgirl Esquire. Any comments on that, Jeff? Article 1, Section 8, vaccinations anywhere in there?
No. This is a great illustration of how Marxist we are. Because I bet there's a bunch of people out there that the listeners know that are dyed-in-the-wool. Yes, you should have to have your vaccines. I meet them all the time at work. But they are, quote-unquote, conservatives. They think that, you know, so what are they conserving? They're conserving their level of Marxism. It's okay to have Marxism as long as it's their Marxism and their people implementing the Marxism on everyone else. So here is cultural Marxism at its best.
Well, and you know, before I get into the last one too, let me share this article. Thomas Sowell warns that the United States might not resist the siren song of socialism. Remember, Donald Trump said, we will never be a socialist nation. And my response to that was, we already are.
Yeah, too late.
Too late. That you know, that horse done left the barn. He is the author of, if you're not familiar with Thomas Sowell, Basic Economics, A Vision of the Anointed, The Quest for Cosmic Justice. There's an article here in the Washington Times expressing these sentiments. And he was actually a Marxist in his youth. And he recently made these remarks. I do have a great fear that in the long run, we may not make it. I hate to say that. The one thing that keeps me from being despairing is that we don't know. There are so many things we can't possibly know. And so we may make it, but I wouldn't bet on it. Well, gee, let's see. We have a compulsory public education system. We have federal intervention in police departments across this continental landmass. We have federal takeover of student loans, federal takeover of the transportation system, federal takeover of the health industrial complex. Do I really need to go on? Tell me something. I think it's a lot harder to find something the federal government doesn't have a say in than what it does. We are a socialist country. So what do we do about it? I don't know. Let's just keep pointing the finger at the Democrats. You know, I had this discussion on Paul Jensen's show on K-Talk Media on Tuesday, Inside the News. And, you know, he said, so what do we do? Because I said, look, the Republicans are just as bad. You You keep pointing the finger at one another, but nobody really wants to point the finger at what the real risk here, the real danger is a runaway federal government. We have socialism everywhere. And he says, how's it ever going to change? I said, I don't know. I don't have an answer. But I'll tell you what, that's why I prepare. That's why I left the hellhole of California and came out here to the mountains of Utah in a prepper's paradise, where if this whole thing goes Venezuela, if not in my lifetime, at least my progeny will have a place where at least they stand a chance. Does that sound a little bit extreme? Well, what I tell people, do your preparations around a manner in which you can still enjoy your life. I'm not up here living in shipping containers and having bug out drills, you know, putting goats into school buses and running off in a hazmat suit. My life is really nice. I can get to the big city, but it takes me long enough that I'm not going to expect a horde of people in here. So, you know, I've honestly said, Jeff, what is the answer? Well, decentralization. But as we see and we discuss with these local cases, tyranny rains down not only from Washington, D.C., but springs up in your local communities, from your HOA to, we talked yesterday about Florida lawmakers proposing a bill that will make it a crime to pet your freaking dog while you're driving your car. All of this under these disastrous, distracted driving laws. What can you not do in your car? I was telling my son about this yesterday. I said, what's going to happen next? Can you not pick your nose when you're driving? Anybody that has a horse knows we do these excavation projects on the way from the barn. And then he chimes in, yes, a mechanic can agree to this statement. So what can you end up not doing in your vehicle while you're driving, and where do we draw the line? Here's another one. Do you want to comment, Jeff, before I move over to the Constitutional Convention article?
I think we got that. If there's any question of where we stand on this, well, you just listen to the replay because it's all there.
Yeah. Don't tell me I can't pick my nose. This is from a station that has a commentator named Booger. How appropriate. Before I get into an article on a First Amendment and Supreme Court case that's being discussed right now, I want to talk about something else, again, coming out of Utah that will affect everybody. Utah legislature just approved a resolution calling for a state convention to change the U.S. Constitution. What they're proposing, Utah is one of the states now that are calling forth an Article 5 convention. Some people are up in arms and very upset about this. Some people call for it. I'm neutral. I can explain both sides of it. I think it's kind of a pointless exercise, but let's examine both sides here. First, I'm going to share what they say in this article, again, out of the Deseret. The Utah House of Representatives voted to give final approval to a joint resolution calling for a convention to consider amendments to the United States Constitution. Now, there's a big movement out here in Utah because of the teachings of the LDS Church that this is absolutely unacceptable, but I will submit to these people that Article 5 is within the sacred document. So, you know, how can they say you can't change a sacred document when the very sacred document says you can? And by the way, I really don't believe the notion that God in his own, recognizing his own fallibility, would rely on mortal man to perfect his good work. So that being said, this resolution does not require approval from our governor, and it adds Utah to, excuse me, to the list of states seeking to convene a convention to propose amendments to the Constitution to address what the resolution's House sponsor called a broken federal government. The checks and balances in our Constitution have been stretched and broken, according to Nelson, a Republican from Grantsville. All three branches are exercising legislative power. The courts are deciding matters of public policy. The executive is issuing executive orders, making law as we speak. You're going to love this one, Jeff. And there's no way to challenge it. Ahem.
Yeah, I gotta say something about this checks and balances. That is an elementary school farce. That was a lie that you learned in the public school. Mm-hmm. There are no checks and balances. Read Article 1, Section 8. Where is all the power vested? Suzanne, just tell the listeners, and I'll keep moving on with this.
All legislative power shall be vested in the Congress. Here's
okay. So what does the president have? He can veto. He has no powers to do anything other than do what the Congress and the House and the Senate say to do. So they pass a law. He executes the law. He has no power. He can appoint, people to his cabinet, but that goes to the Senate to be confirmed. So, and then the judges, they can only hear cases that the Congress allows them to hear. Now, the thing is, Congress doesn't exercise that power anymore. It just lets them go willy-nilly, do whatever they want. But in fact, all of the power, read the Constitution, folks, read it. All the powers are listed in Article 1, Section 8. That is legislative. Everything that's in the other articles is related to Article 1, Section 8. They respond to Article 1, Section 8. Congress and the legislature takes care of everything, and those two are under their control, basically.
You know, one other issue I found where I again feel that was a huge flaw in this Constitution. Somebody had told me, well, the president can propose policies. I said, well, where's that power? You know what? It is in the Constitution. The president can propose suggested policies in his State of the Union address. That has morphed into the whole presidential policy platform. That's where this originated from. I never thought of that. When that person cited the Constitution to my question, I thought, holy cow, this is another fatal flaw in a document that was supposed to put forth a Republican system of government in a federal framework, not a national framework. And then here's the other key part of this guy's quote. There's no way to challenge it. Now, Jeff, you mentioned that was the three branches of power, checks and balances, and is an elementary school interpretation. And you are absolutely correct, because who is intended to be the ultimate arbiter of the federal power and whether or not they have gone beyond it? The states. And there's no way to challenge it. I need to get a hold of this guy and tell him, yes, there is a way to challenge it. It's called nullification. There's another one that people just refuse to go along with. It's called secession. There were ways to fight federal overreach. It happened from the get-go when Alexander Hamilton threw off his Department of Secretary of the Treasury hat and put on his Secretary of Defense hat, convinced Washington to march into Pennsylvania. Dave Benner and I discussed this. We had a show, an afternoon show a couple weeks ago where we discussed the Hamilton and Marshall legacy. Go back and you can hear how we explained that. Not long after that, President John Adams, the Alien and Sedition Act. Well, what happened there? We had the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions drafted by Madison and Jefferson, respectively, that said nullification is the ultimate remedy against federal overreach. Here we have.
You had Jefferson, Madison, John Taylor, Caroline. They met in secret. They had to do this on the sly, because if the government found out they were proposing these resolutions, they would have been thrown in prison for sedition.
Yep. And now what he says here,
got a First Amendment right. Give me my First Amendment right.
This guy says that the only way to push back against the federal government is an Article 5 convention. So apparently we're going to have a convention and then an amendment that says, this time we really mean it. You're going to obey the Constitution. You know, there are two proposals for these Article 5 conventions. One is an open-ended one, which people justifiably find very scary. I remember when back when I first got my Sirius XM radio in my truck and I was listening to Patriot XM, there were two different guys I was listening to. This one guy, Mark Levin, who would blast these backbenchers like Tom Woods, Kevin Gutzman, Mike Church, saying that an Article 5 convention was a horrible idea. Then he decided to be for it, and he thought it was a great idea, wrote a book about it, and made millions of dollars. Then there was another guy.
It was funny. Mike Church had a symposium.
Yeah.
And read the transcript of the symposium. And then don't read Mark's book because it's a waste of time. But look at the table of contents and notice how his amendments mirror Mike Church's.
Oh, he totally, yeah. If don't think he wasn't inspired by all this, yeah. And they've challenged him to debates, and he absolutely refuses. So, an open-ended convention would be a very scary thing because, again, we just had Hawaii saying we're going to propose that Congress get rid of the Second Amendment. And then the article, what I said yesterday, even the author of that article said this is entirely the proper way to put forth this, to ask Congress to repeal the Second Amendment. No, you have to have another amendment to repeal an existing amendment. Not only that, repealing the Second Amendment means nothing because it merely reiterates that this was never a power delegated to Congress in the first place. And this is what I say, even people that are putting out these articles interpreting the Constitution, they screw it up. People don't even know what is constitutional or what is not. They look again to case law. They look to the pundits who are often law school professors, and they all get it wrong. Go to sources like Gutzman, Woods, the 10th Amendment Center. Avoid the mainstream media with these discussions. It's really awful. So now there was an organization, I don't know if it's still in effect, Compact for America. Our friend Kevin Gutzman was on the board of directors for this organization, and they were putting forth a proposal for a single issue convention. So if anybody tried to bring up another resolution within this pact, it would be rejected and not accepted at all. And that proposal was for a balanced budget resolution. And okay, let's for the sake of argument say that we get the 2/3 of states to propose this. Again, we don't need Congress involved at all in new amendments. So the states can do this, the states can ratify. Do you really think they're going to honor a balanced budget amendment? They're not honoring the ones we have, for crying out loud. So ultimately, I think a constitutional convention for whatever issue you have, term limits or whatever. Term limits is another doozy. Okay, so we have stupid voters putting in stupid politicians. That ain't going to change until we fix our education system, get people out of the education system, raise your kids, teach them the proper role of government, teach them proper history. The information's out there. Anybody can do it. If a dummy like me could do it, anybody can. So the resolution passed the House majority. Some Republicans joined Democrats in opposing the vote, and the Senate, it passed the Senate earlier this week. Debate ended before any representative spoke against the resolution, but the opponents have previously expressed fear that a convention could result in drastic and dangerous changes to the Constitution. So again, that was in the Deseret News. You can read the article; it's entirety if you like. But that's my thoughts on the whole Constitutional Convention. Again, what we've talked about in the show so far has been, and I stick to this topic regularly, a complete usurpation of the system that was put into effect by the founders and ratifiers. That is a federalist system. They even had, as you mentioned, Jeff, yesterday, the propaganda during the ratification debate era that those that were opposed to the Constitution because it was not setting up a federal government, they were the true Federalists, but they were called the Anti-Federalists, and that has a connotation of negativity, almost to the terms of law and order, and that they were the bad guys and didn't want this holy parchment to ever be ratified. I submit to you, those were the true Federalists, and those that wanted the Constitution, where you had the Edmund Randolph and you had James Madison was the nationalist, and Clyde Wilson said he was disingenuous. He's really not one that you should quote when you're looking towards the original intentions of the Constitution. That's his book, Nullification. Fascinating book, by the way. Jeff, let's turn a little bit to some First Amendment issues, because we've got another case going up before the Black Robe Messiahs. And there was an article out from Law and Liberty, came out the 7th. So this one's brand new. And they're asking, will the court finally kill the lemon test ghoul? And as I go through this article and the time we have left for the remainder of the show, pick out what is not being discussed here. And there was a case in 1947, Everson versus the Board of Education. And I remember I remember these classes in con law. Again, I say con law is appropriately called con law. It's supposed to be constitutional law, but it is a con. So con law is the appropriate name for it. Justice Hugo Black, and I'm going to describe him a little bit later, clearly proclaimed that the First Amendment has erected a wall between church and state. The wall must be kept high and impregnable. We could not approve the slightest breach. But here's what's interesting. He concluded that a New Jersey program subsidizing transportation of parochial students was constitutional. That's kind of contradictory to his proclamation. The majority in dissenting opinions in Everson relied on a dubious reading of American history, but the metaphor of a wall of separation between church and state could have provided guidance to lower courts if anyone actually followed it. So taken literally, the article explains it would create a bright line prohibiting any state involvement with churches or other religious entities. For instance, a wall would seem to exempt synagogues from building codes and prohibit police officers from protecting church property. But no jurist has ever understood the Establishment Clause to require such outcomes. Now, the argument, the hole in this argument is so big in his analysis, I could drive a truck through. He is completely ignoring the fact that the First Amendment, like the Second, was intended to be a restriction upon Congress. So right here, built into this article, is the incorporation doctrine, and it is being accepted as legitimate. So that's a huge flaw in this article. But I'm going to go ahead.
And he's ignoring the first 5 words of the First Amendment.
Congress shall make no law.
I mean, if you don't want to believe the preamble and that it's a restriction to the general government alone, the first 5 words tell you right off the bat. And again, did it say the president? No. Did it say the judiciary? No. Because who had the power under this Constitution? Going back to my previous statement, Congress. Oh, okay. I'll get off that. I'll get off that horse.
So what we have here, in hopes of bringing some clarity to the Establishment Clause jurisprudence, he already muddied the waters. But anyway, justices created an analytical test in Lemon versus Kurtzman. This was a case out of this from the Black Robe Messiahs, 1971. We called it in law school, because we always had to have acronyms. We called it the P test, and that was purpose, effect, and entanglement. I'm going to explain that. The Lemon test permits laws and policies that benefit religion if they, first of all, have a secular purpose, that's the purpose, do not have a principal or primary effect of advancing or inhibiting religion, that's the effect, and then 3, do not foster, here's our E, excessive entanglement between government and religion. This test has proven no more useful than the wall of separation metaphor, and Supreme Court justices have used it to strike down and uphold a variety of similar practices, and they periodically ignore it and then revive it. Again, this has absolutely, this is, when they came up with this test, this was, again, like their analysis in Roe or Bergefeld, all of these cases where they come up with, where they're legislating from the bench. And this is, again, going back to the call for the Article 5 convention, where the proponent aptly describes as legislation emanating from all 3 branches of government, none of them being a serious check on the other. So that is a valid point. They're ignoring the fact that this was never intended to apply to the states who already had their constitutions in effect. By the way, at the time the Constitution was ratified, states, 3 of them had their own state-established churches. So there is absolutely no fact that you can convince me of that will show that the Bill of Rights was intended from the get-go to apply to the states. Even the intent of the 14th Amendment as ratified was never intended to do so. And I explained that in my article with regards to firearms in McDonald with Scalia's concurring opinion on that. And that is actually on SuzanneCSherman.com, SuzanneCSherman.com, where I have my article published by the 10th Amendment Center. So going back to Lemon versus Kurtzman, we have the P test. And again, this is proven no more useful, again, than the separation metaphor. And I'm going to get into where that metaphor came about. So this is relevant now because we have a case, the American Legion versus American Humanist Association, involves a 40-foot Latin cross erected by private citizens on private land to commemorate 49 men from Prince George's County in Maryland who died in the First World War. So because of safety concerns, Maryland took over the memorial. The state of Maryland, known as the Bladensburg Cross, in 1961. The Fourth Circuit federal court concluded that the state involvement has the primary effect of endorsing religion and excessively entangles the government in religion, and so is in violation of the Establishment Clause. As I indicated, the incorporation doctrine is horsepucky, and so is that conclusion there from the Fourth Circuit. The decision, if affirmed by the Supreme Court, raises questions about the constitutionality of religious symbols and expressions on public land across the nation. Pardon the N-word, that is a quote. Again, folks, this is the result of the Marshall legacy, where the states have been rendered, which is what Hamilton wanted, mere subsidiaries to the central government. On February 27, 2019, returning to the article, the U.S. Supreme Court heard oral arguments in the case. Neil Katyal represented the state of Maryland, and he emphasized that the cross was built 93 years ago by private individuals and is currently situated in a park alongside other war memorials. He also stressed that in the wake of World War I, crosses like this and others have an independent secular meaning. The Deputy Solicitor General, arguing as a friend of the court, I believe Kevin Gutzman signed one of the amicus briefs on here as well, on behalf of the state, reiterated many of these points. Now, representing the American Legion is Michael Carving, and he encouraged the court to abandon the lemon test. Drawing from the town of Greece versus Galloway, this was a local situation here, approach to the legislative prayer, he argued that historical approach to the Establishment Clause provides better guidance to the lower courts than asking them to discern whether a reasonable observer might consider a memorial to be endorsing religion. So in this sort of case, he says, he contended that the governments can engage in religious speech so long as they are not coercive or attempting to proselytize, because the purpose of the cross is in question is to memorialize soldiers and is not to coerce or convert. It is constitutional. It is not constitutional because that is its purpose. It is constitutional because it is a state issue. The Supreme Court hearing this case in and of itself is unconstitutional. Jeff, why am I the only one saying this all the time? I guess the horses left the barn and nobody cares anymore.
Yes. And here's really something that I've often thought. Okay, here it says that they shall pass no law, basically setting up a state religion. And so everyone calls it freedom of religion. But what they're really pushing is freedom from religion.
Yeah.
You know, it's, if we are free to exercise our religion as we wish, which we are, that's a natural right. This has nothing to do with government. This is a restriction from the government restricting me from practicing my religion. If I'm free to practice my religion, that doesn't mean that you have to be free from religion. That just means that you don't have to practice religion. That's your choice. Me, I can practice my religion. But government does not guarantee our freedom from religion. And that's where this all goes.
You're always discussing the planks of communism. Doesn't this fit right into that?
I think it's not one of the planks, as I remember, but it does fit into the goals. There's Greg had has a I'm not sure where it's from. It has like 40 some goals of communism, And I know that's one of the goals of communism is to get rid of religion and replace it with the state.
Yeah,
So,
Agenda 21, disrupt and abolish traditional family values, traditional beliefs and practices, and separating people from their religious philosophies, which again focus on individual personal responsibility, and substituting that for the collective is part and parcel. It's a heart and soul of that progressive Marxist movement. So let me get back.
Take off your tinfoil hat, Susan.
Right. Monica Miller argued on behalf of the American Humanist Association, and she said that the cross is a uniquely religious symbol, blah, blah, blah. I'm not going to get into all that. It doesn't matter if it is or it is not. We don't need to get into that. This is a jurisdictional issue that is left for the state to decide. So here's a prediction that they're saying it's always risky to predict how justices will decide. This is what's so frustrating. The whole, when we have these presidential elections, particularly in this time frame with Donald Trump, where we have some justices that were going to be replaced, everybody's hanging their hat on what justices he's going to put in place so they can decide these issues that they have no business adjudicating in the first place. So they're talking about, let's see, questions and past votes suggest that Roberts, Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, Alito, Thomas will find the cross to be constitutional. Breyer may well, blah, blah, blah. Who cares? When Gorsuch had his nomination speech, he said it is the responsibility of the Supreme Court to defend liberties across the nation. Oh, my God. So are we going to have a lemon test? Or
this is a second one, whether it's marriage or religion or whatever. Here it is again. Congress can set the court's ability to hear these cases,
and they never do.
They abdicate that power again too.
Why would they cut back on their own power and influence? I'm going to discuss a case next week of the sociopaths are going to Washington. Those that seek this kind of power, there's something inherently wrong with them. The lemon test or a return to America's founders. The Bladensburg Cross is certainly constitutional, but First Amendment experts will await the court's opinion. Well, if you're awaiting the court's opinion, you're not damn expert. Gosh, this is just so annoying. Justice Gorsuch appears to be leaning in this direction, referring to Lemon's endorsement test as a dog's breakfast, and later observing it has been a long time since the court has applied Lemon, but yet the Court of Appeals continue to cite it and reuse it. And again, that was a quintessential example of legislation from the bench. So I want to turn to a little bit of history here. And in his book, The Politically Correct Guide to the Constitution, our good friend Kevin Gutzman explains some of these religious tests and some of the religious history in here. And the wall of separation between church and state was really taken from a quote from a letter that Thomas Jefferson had written to some Danbury Baptists. But here's a little bit of information about Justice Hugo Black, who was the opinion writer in Everson. He was a leading proponent of the incorporation doctrine. And again, Kevin says that this is the means by which the Federal Bill of Rights was held against the states, inverting the federal system created by the ratifiers. And Black was actually a former Klansman. He took the lead in writing the 21st century Klan's views on church-state relations into constitutional law. He mentions Everson versus Board of Education and Engel versus Vitale. And again, his first purpose of the court was to support Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal, the Supreme Court's traditional role. He eschewed that by checking, which was supposed to check congressional efforts to legislate beyond its enumerated powers. So what does the court do? They just start doing it itself. I mean, who doesn't want to miss miss that party. Interestingly, here's a quote from Black. And what part of this did he not understand? I believe the court has no power to add to or subtract from the procedures set forth by the founders. I shall not at any time surrender my belief that the document itself should be our guide, not our own concept of what is fair, decent, and right. But that's exactly what he went and did. So, I mean, this shows the fundamental flaw in this analysis here. So, anything you want to add to this, Jeff?
No, I think we got it.
And again, at this point, we also had, in addition to anti-Semitism, racial issues in the Klan, they also turned to anti-Catholicism. And that was really the basis for a lot of his religious experience or opinions here. Black claimed that not only did the First Amendment Establishment Clause apply to state and local governments, which we know it did not, according to the original understanding. Again, some states at the time of ratification had established state churches. But he said that the Establishment Clause also erected in language not found in the Constitution, again, a wall of separation between church and state. Now, he's, again...
That's where I was... you know that you said that. That's what I was going to say about this. Here we have, and Kevin just hit it right there. They're taking something that's not in the Constitution and applying it and making it law.
And also by citing Thomas Jefferson, Jefferson wasn't even a part of the Constitution's drafting or ratification. So again, he's cherry picking out. And here's a part in the book here where Kevin says Thomas Jefferson played no role in drafting or adopting the Establishment Clause. And the metaphor, the wall of separation between church and state, was coined by Jefferson in a letter written a decade after the First Amendment's ratification. And the letter was not concerned about the issue of state establishments, but an explanation of why Jefferson did not issue presidential declarations of thanksgiving and fasting as Presidents Washington and Adams had done. So we have one statement taken out of context that continues to affect modern American jurisprudence to this day in direct contravention to the founding and ratification principles. Again, I say this all the time, thanks to a runaway judiciary enabling a rogue Congress, an imperial president, we have reverted back to a system we fought a war to get out from under. That was called parliamentary sovereignty. The founders recognized that a constitution, by implication, remember the conversation I had with Dave Benner and implied powers. This came about with Hamilton and the First National Bank. A constitution, by implication, is the same as having no constitution at all. Who had no constitution at all? England. What did they have? Parliamentary sovereignty. What did we go to war to get out from under? Parliamentary sovereignty. What do we have today? Congressional sovereignty, executive sovereignty, judicial sovereignty, state ignorance on their proper role to check a runaway general government, a system of education that continues the ignorance of a dumbed-down populace to conform to and to cheer on this rogue, illegal, corrupt, bipartisan regime. Can we ever fix this? It ain't going to happen from Article 5. It ain't going to happen by voting for the Republicans. It ain't going to happen by getting the right Supreme Court justices. I don't have an answer. Secession would be fantastic, decentralization, but then we have to fight the tyrants at another level. We've got this mentality. We've got two camps here. We've got one camp that wants to be left alone, to be responsible for their own health care, to pay for their own housing, to pay for their own food, to communicate freely, to worship freely. And we've got another faction that says we're going to regulate every single aspect of your life. It's going to be for your own good. You may not like it, but we're going to do it anyway. What are you going to do about it? We've got all the guns. You might think you have them. Put your little Mullen Law-based stickers on your car. Identify yourself for us, please. Where do we go from here? Be the gray man. Be prepared. We can't continue this. We're going to run out of time, folks, for freedom. I'm sounding the alarm. We're trying our best here at the Cerberus Radio Network. On behalf of the rest of us here, Jeff Johnson, Greg Junkbon Carpenter, our good friend Booger, Dave Benner, all of those that contribute, all of those that follow, thank you very much. Thanks for listening. God bless you.